rose representing Israel has 13 petals, and each petal represents one of the tribes of Israel. So that is 13. And we have 13 tribes, but 3 of these tribes, that is Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, were. But only 3 of these tribes remained. What happened? You had 13 tribes together in one kingdom of Israel, and then the northern 10 tribes separated, they divided, they seceded, they set up their own kingdom, and they were conquered by the Assyrians and taken into exile and lost consciousness of their ancestry, and afterwards they migrated in different pathways to the west. Whereas there remained the 3 tribes in the south, in the kingdom of Judah. The 3 tribes in the south in the kingdom of Judah were Judah, tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. And that was a core element of the Jewish people. And to them were added refugees and others from the northern tribes who somehow or other, as minority elements, as represented minority elements, also attach themselves to Judah, but the majority, and they comprise perhaps altogether 20% of the population of Judah. But the main tribes of Judah, of the kingdom of Judah, were Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, and they were 3 tribes. So the 10 tribes have been exiled, and they would have separate goals in history, as we shall see, separate goals in history, and there was a reason, a purpose for this separation. They will have to have a different destiny, a different reason for existence, referred to in various sources that we will quote from. Now concerning the Zohar mentions the tribe of the rose of Israel with 13 petals, with white petals surrounded by red petals, and also 5 leaves. And the Tudor rose also has 5 leaves, and also being surrounded by thorns. And the earliest representations of the Tudor rose also show it attached to thorns. So there's quite similar. But neither borrowed from the other, because we already see how the Tudor rose came into being. It had nothing to do with the Zohar, nothing to do with the Jews. But we could say the divine providence so wanted it that the English who would come to represent Ephraim, and a major body of the 10 tribes would also have a symbol of their own, that would be that of Israel, according to the Zohar. The Zohar is mainly a commentary. It's a kind of commentary on the Bible and on Judaism in general. It's often mystical, uses symbolic imagery that's sometimes difficult to follow. Language in the Zohar may be Hebrew, maybe Aramaic, but mostly there's some type of mixture of the two. It consists of sayings attributed to Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai, who lived about 100 BCE in the land of Israel, and who is mentioned in the Talmud. And the Zohar may also be considered a compilation of different sources, like the Midrash, of different levels of reliability, all brought together, edited and re-edited and presented to the sayings of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. We don't really know. Some modern authorities claim the Zohar is a forgery, an early forgery. They say that Rabbi Moses de Leon, who first had it published, was the real author, but they haven't got much proof of this, and it's not convincing in our opinion. And religious Jews who wish to reject the Zohar would not necessarily be censured for doing so. Unlike the Talmud, religious Jews cannot reject the Talmud. The Talmud is accepted as the oral tradition. At least they could not reject the Talmud in those sections concerning the practical application of the law. But the Zohar could be rejected if a person was not convinced of its truth. But despite this, the Zohar corresponds to much older sources. What the Zohar says in many places is also been said beforehand in similar fashion. Most great rabbis quote from the Zohar. Some do not relate to it. Most of them believe in it. Most of the Sephardic rabbis, the Hasidim, most of the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazim, they all consider the Zohar a sacred work. Rabbi Avraham Kook, who was the spiritual leader of the national religious modern Jews, he once opined that regardless of who wrote the Zohar, it is still an inspired work. The Zohar gets its strength from its internal message, from what is in it. People who read the Zohar feel inspired by it. It definitely has insights of value. And so that is it. So that is what we have. The passage in the Zohar concerning the rose of Israel, it says, as a rose among the thorns, so is my love among the maidens, quoting from the Song of Solomon 2:2. What is the rose? It is the assemblage of Israel, the community of Israel. For there is a rose above and a rose below, just as a rose which is among the thorns is red and white, so does the assemblage, that is the community of Israel, have justice and mercy. Just as a rose has 13 petals, so does the community of Israel have 13 measures of compassion, encompassing it on all sides. 5 strong leaves surround the rose. So this is a description of the tuberose. Apart from the fact that the rose of Israel in the Zohar has 13 petals and the tuberose has 10 petals, everything else is the same. Prophet Hosea compares Israel to a Shoshana, which is translated as a lily, but actually means a rose. Hosea 14:5 says, I will be like the dew to Israel, shall grow like the Shoshana, that is a rose, and lengthen its roots like Lebanon. He said that Shoshana actually means rose, and the rose is connected with Israel in this passage. The rose was also a symbol of royalty, the rosette, in the ancient Middle East, both in Israel and in countries round about it. There was an article on this in an issue of Biblical Archaeological Review with pictures. Hosea 14 prophesied that Israel would grow like a Shoshana, like the Shoshana, like the rose. And the tuberose of England was also used as a symbol of loyalty. During Second Temple times, the gate of Kaponis was to the west of the Temple Mount. This was the main entrance for entering and leaving the Temple Mount. And just outside the entrance to this gate was a rose garden. So the rose is associated with the temple. We had a question from Mark McGee, what is the significance of Lebanon being recalled in association with the rose in Hosea 14, where it says, I will be like the dew to Israel, he shall grow like the Shoshana, the rose, and strengthen his roots like Lebanon. So Lebanon, in the Bible, depending on the context, can mean the area of Lebanon, or it can mean the temple. Lebanon is another name, another term for the temple. The word Lebanon means white, white. In Hebrew, in Arabic, Liban, the root Laban means white, and the temple would whiten, purify the sins of Israel. And also the first temple of Solomon, had wood from Lebanon in its structure. You would have 3 levels, I forget the details, 3 levels of stone, a level of wood, cedar wood around, and then more stone on top of that. And artisans from Lebanon, and ingredients for the temple were supplied from Lebanon. So Lebanon was associated both in its name and in its geography with the Temple Mount, with the temple. We quoted that Hosea, recording the Shoshana, the rose, in Lebanon. Hosea in chapter 14, also in chapter 14, it says, Ephraim shall say, would I ever do any more with idols? I've heard and observed him. I am like a green cypress tree, your fruit is found in me. This is referring to the end times, when Ephraim, that is the lost tribes, will return and reunite with Judah in the end times. It also says in Hosea 14, who is wise, let him understand these things, who is prudent, let him know them. The ways of the Lord are right, the righteous walk in them, the transgressors stumble in them. Rabbi David Moshe Valley, writing in the 1700s, on these verses, he commented that the impure. He commented with a message that explains the purpose of the lost 10 tribes. Why the lost 10 tribes? Why the lost 10 tribes were exiled, and what's the purpose of their exile? He says, the impurity and debasement of the 10 tribes. The 10 tribes was not their true nature. They became pagans. They left the worship of God Almighty. They became pagans. Much later they converted to Christianity. That is a different matter. For a long time they were complete pagans. And so he says the impurity and debasement of the 10 tribes is not their true nature. The power of repentance can elevate a person to a greater height than he ever had before. The Israelites have an innate purity. They therefore do not have to try very hard to return to where they should have been if they had not sinned. The non-Israelite people are not like this. And he says, further on, it is a known matter that Ephraim, meaning the 10 tribes, that Ephraim did not descend into the realms of pollution, other for the need to clarify his destiny. He needed to fulfill the will of God and reform the world through redirecting its forces. When this is done, there will be no need for Ephraim to remain in that situation anymore. That is, the 10 tribes were exiled. They became like the pagans in order to reform the world from within and to clarify certain aspects of their destiny, to help the world in general, which is something that they did do. And when their time is complete, they will return and recognize the Israelite ancestry and everything connected with that. At the moment, our task is merely to remind them of their ancestry, to bring their ancestry to their recognition. This is the beginning of a process, and this is what we have to do and needs to be done. And we need assistance in this. Another point of interest is that we have the poppy. The poppy flower is quite different from the rose. It's a red colour, a little red colour flower, but it's also attractive. And the poppy, and it's also similar to the rose in some ways in its colour scheme. The poppy is important in Britain and in France as commemorating those who fell in battle on behalf of the homeland. You wear a poppy in England, maybe also in France and Belgium, on a certain day to commemorate those who died in battle on behalf of the country. The poppy is also the national flower of Belgium and of the State of Israel. And we saw the State of Israel is dominated by Judah, along with many from Benjamin and Levi, and represented minorities from the other tribes. Belgium also has many amongst its populace descended from Benjamin. So there follows comments by Steve Math and by Mark McGee.
Shalom.
Shalom.
This is what my wife made in pottery.
Oh, very nice. Show that again,
Yeah.
please. Show it again. Can you show it again, please?
Yes.
Oh,
I'm sure. Yeah, and there's my name.
Okay.
and my wife is yeah.
Did she make it because of us or no, or because of for other reasons?
You know, when I first learned from you about the Tudor Rose, when she took pottery, I asked her to make me one.
Oh, very
Yeah,
good. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Sorry, I think I was muted, but any case, yeah, that's a pottery.
Okay.
I don't think I have a lot of comments about the Tudor House of York at this time. It's all your research, but it is an amazing um, revelation or record, I would say, from the Zohar, an independent source that's not connected to either House of York or House of the Tudors or the English-speaking world, period. It's in the Jewish world, and that's important, that this verification of who's Ephraim, is coming to light now in our days. It's been there for centuries, but it's not been known. So now it's being advertised, so it's broadcast out into the English-speaking world. Praise Hashem.
Okay.
I just made a note. I guess you're familiar with Robert Louis Stevenson, the author, Treasure Island.
Yes.
We finished here at home reading The Black Arrow this summer, and it pertains to the War of the Roses. Stevenson had one description in this book that stood out, that's pertinent to your talk. Each time the advantage changed from Lancaster to York, this term or this phrase kept showing up, that the world changed again. Lancaster takes over, the world changed. And when York concluded that the world was flipped over, the world changed again. So maybe Stevenson, that was a manner of speaking, but he had some sort of awareness that the entire world was changing each time something happened within the War of the Roses, within the House of Lancaster or York, that it pertained to the whole world. So I wanted to add that. And if you've got just a second, could you make another comment on this term for Lebanon that you mentioned?
Okay.
Is it possible that's a mistranslation, or is it more something that could be read into that term?
1 second.
Go ahead.
No, just concerning Stevenson, he also wrote Kidnapped. He wrote, when I was young, I used to read classic comics. You know the classic comics? When I was young, I used to have classic comics. And my father at the shop used to sell comics and books. And when I was about 6 years old, I already knew how to read, and I used to sit in the shop when my father was working under the counter and read all these comics. Classic comics, which had all the classic literature, hundreds of them, all classic literature written up in comic book form. And I became quite an expert. And that stayed with me all my life, that the knowledge of the overall themes of all the classical, many of the classical works of Western civilization, and some of them I actually read in the original form when I got older. So that was, and anyway, one of the comic books that I read, and it led me to read the books themselves, were the classical comics of Stevenson. I remember Treasure Island, I remember Kidnapped, and there were a few others that I don't remember, but they made an impression. Anyway. Lebanon, concerning Lebanon, we quoted from Isaiah. Lebanon, it says, I will be like the dew to Israel, he should grow like the lily, actually in Hebrew, Shoshana, meaning a rose, and lengthen his roots like Lebanon. Lebanon, in the Bible, several times we have this expression Lebanon, and sometimes it refers to Lebanon, the country of Lebanon. I mean, Solomon built the temple. He built a good portion of the temple, was actually built out of wood. I forget the details, but he had layers of stone, and in between he had layers of wood. And he also used a lot of cedars from Lebanon. And the temple is also referred to as Lebanon. And Lebanon is, the name for Lebanon is based on the root white. Lavan, in Hebrew, the B and the V use the same letter in many cases. So the Lavan or Liban in Arabic is the same root, the same word, meaning white. And why is it called Lebanon? Because it would whiten, it would purify the sins of Israel. That was why the temple is referred to in the Bible itself as Lebanon, according to different explanations.